Everyone deserves a second chance. God has blessed my life with opportunities. So please join with Jim McGreevy to learn how to clean your record, okay? I need everyone who ever been convicted of any kind of crime to be a part of this, okay? Join us at 12 o'clock on Facebook Live. We be there.
Thank you. And thanks, Rev, and thank you to Mike Tyson for that generous presentation. And now I'd like to show a brief tape of our governor, Phil Murphy, talking about the importance of second chances.
Hey, good morning, everyone. This is Governor Phil Murphy. I am thrilled to see this important seminar continue despite the obstacles of COVID-19. And I want to thank the National Action Network and New Jersey Reentry Corporation for the invitation to be a part of today's program. As you know, our administration is firmly committed to transforming our criminal justice system, and the issue of expungement is a critical piece of that process. If we aim to live in a truly just society, the primary objective of our criminal justice system must be rehabilitation and integration. In December, I was proud to sign our second chance legislation, one of the most progressive expungement laws in the nation, which will allow more New Jerseyans an opportunity to fully engage in our society, education or employment or housing or other needs. This past week, I was proud to share my vision for New Jersey's next budget, which, despite all the obstacles, keeps our priorities and our values intact. With $12 million set aside for this initiative, by next spring we'll be prepared to remove the bar on expungements and reclassify drug-related offenses as convictions of disorderly persons. This reclassification comes with a considerably lesser sentence, which is a step in the right direction in the fight to end mass incarceration. Over the past few years, our nation has had to take a long, hard look at itself. And although some would pretend otherwise, the truth is that systemic racism pervades our society at many levels, unfairly stacking the deck against the Black and brown communities. These communities have been disproportionately affected by mass incarceration. Those who find themselves stuck in this vicious cycle are met with even more hurdles once they're released. The stigma of being formally incarcerated can follow someone for the rest of their life and can potentially prohibit them from pursuing an education or finding employment or purchasing a house, namely all the things that steady a person and create a feeling of belonging and hope for the future. I am proud and relieved that the Clean Slate Bill will help to eliminate these obstacles through the process of expungement. This is common sense, folks. No one should be judged based on a single mistake. And the new expungement laws will give everyone the chance to have up to 5 offenses removed from their record. This makes a huge turning point in the future of New Jersey's criminal justice system and the involved community. It allows people to be seen for more than the mistakes they once made and puts them on a path to rehabilitation upon release. This kind of legislation affirms the hope that all of us, no matter our past, can reach our potential for greatness in the future. We are on a mission to make New Jersey stronger and fairer for all residents, but we cannot achieve that reality without addressing the issues facing the court-involved community. The Clean Slate Bill is a step toward that reality and a step toward reducing the role systemic racism plays in our criminal justice system. I want to thank the New Jersey Reentry Corporation and the National Action Network for working tirelessly to ensure that the court-involved community has a strong advocate in their corner. I look forward to our continued partnership in making New Jersey stronger and fairer, not just for some, but for all. Thank you so much for having me, and God bless each and every one of you.
Thank you. I'd just like to extend my gratitude to the governor for that message and for his willingness and support of the bill through the entire part of the process. And I'd like to, now, it's a great honor to call upon an Attorney General whose responsibility is to uphold and to enforce the law, but he's been a tremendous partner with us. And I'd like to call upon Attorney General Gilbert Rural. Imran? Thank you,
I'm here,
General.
Gov.
Hey, thank you so much, General, in that very efficient setting in the Newark office. I was just wondering if you could talk to us a little bit how you see the expungement law, the history of the expungement law in New Jersey,
Yeah.
and what did this bill mean for you as the chief law enforcement officer in the state, and how did you see it as part of the administration's criminal justice reform package?
Sure. Well, thanks, Scott, for that introduction, and good afternoon to everyone who's joining us for the webinar. To all the panelists, it's an honor and a privilege to join you for this seminar to discuss, as Governor McGreevey and Murphy mentioned, an important aspect of our criminal justice system, and that's expungement. I've been a prosecutor for the majority of my legal career, and one of the first lessons, Gov, that I learned as a young prosecutor was perhaps the most important, and it stuck with me, that our successes should never be measured by the number of people we convict or by the lengths of the prison sentences we obtain, but rather by whether or not justice is done in each and every case. Now, sometimes that means charging a defendant, and other times that means arguing for or even agreeing to an alternative to incarceration. And still other times that means exercising your discretion not to bring charges altogether, even though the facts may support them, because that's what justice requires. For me, over the last number of years, there's also been an evolution that I, along with many other prosecutors, have gone through. And that's coming to the realization that rehabilitation has to be part of our effort to seek justice, that reentry programs like the ones that you are championing, Governor, have to be part of our look at what justice truly looks like. And we've also come to realize that justice requires all of us who are in the criminal justice system, to take a second look, to not judge people by their worst mistakes, by their single lapses of judgment on a given day. And in some cases, it means giving people second chances. In other cases, it means giving people a first chance, for those especially who've had the deck stacked against them from day one. And so the bottom line is, I think, that all of us with some degree of experience, we grow. We grow with our life experiences. And a person may take a step down a criminal path, but that conviction, that shouldn't preclude them from turning their life around and getting on a new path. And I think the law should be there to support that good choice. And to me, that's what expungement or a clean slate is about. I've looked at the numbers. Every year, something like 700,000 people are released from prisons across America. In New Jersey, it's thousands of folks each and every year. According to the Reentry Corporation's report, upwards of 9,000 in 2018. And that doesn't even take into consideration the tens of thousands who go through our county jail systems after completing their sentences and after doing their time. But the issue is that these individuals walked into a world too often where they're set up for failure rather than for success. And that's because they're walking into a world where, because of their convictions, they lack access to housing. They have scant job opportunities. There are no meaningful educational or vocational programs available to them. Because of their convictions, as you know, they're ineligible for public benefits, public housing, student loans. And due to housing barriers, it's estimated that 1 in 5 people who leave prison end up homeless. All of this contributes to recidivism, to that cycle of incarceration and release. So we have to do better. And I think, Gov, we have a unique opportunity right now in this moment to do better. We are in the midst of one of the largest protest movements in our nation's history, certainly in my lifetime. And it's a movement that's laid bare the systemic injustices and biases that have plagued our country for centuries. These are systemic biases that have resulted in disparities in everything from education to housing to our healthcare system, as we're seeing during the course of this COVID-19 pandemic, and to the criminal justice system, as we're discussing today. Many thousands of folks have taken to the streets in New Jersey, and millions more across the country are calling for deep structural changes right now to finally address these historical inequities and to right them. But thankfully, over the last number of years, because of the efforts of so many people on this webinar, so many people in this state, we've taken some meaningful steps, and I'll just touch on them briefly as they fit into what we're talking about today. When we talk about policing reforms, we've taken meaningful steps in New Jersey through our Excellence in Policing initiative. We're taking meaningful steps right now in our use of force policy revisions. We're taking meaningful steps by committing to revising our use of force policy by the end of this year. And we're also, thanks to the governor's leadership in reconstituting the Criminal Sentencing Disposition Commission and the efforts of many of the legislators who you'll speak to in a moment, we've already taken a number of meaningful steps in reducing mandatory minimums, which have not only contributed to mass incarceration, but also to racial disparities in our prison system, as we talk about often. And when it comes to recidivism, New Jersey has taken a number of steps forward in trying to break those cycles that I just talked about a moment ago. And those efforts include the work that you're doing, Governor, with the Reentry Corporation, from obtaining identification documents to addressing unpaid fines to connecting individuals to benefits and to services to training and employment opportunities to today's seminar and so much more. Your work is truly breaking cycles for those who are being released from our jails too often without plans for their success. And as are the efforts of Governor Murphy and the legislators joining us today. Over 90% of individuals, 90% of companies use background checks in their hiring decisions. And we know that this has a real effect of putting jobs further out of reach for those reentering society. According to one study I looked at, a criminal record reduces the likelihood of a job callback by almost 50%. And so in New Jersey, thanks to your leadership, the leadership of Senator Cunningham and others, we did something about that. As of April of 2018, we have a ban-the-box law for private employers. Asking about someone's criminal history is prohibited during the initial application stages. The law also prohibits employers from asking about expunge records during this stage. We also know that a criminal record can prevent someone from obtaining an occupational license or a professional license. And again, thanks to all of your efforts, we've done something about that. The governor recently signed legislation to remove these barriers for professional licenses. And it also goes to voting rights. That is recent legislation that so many on this call worked to put into effect. So all of that is part and parcel of the overall effort that includes our new Clean Slate Expungement Law. In December, Governor Murphy signed the Clean Slate bill to reform New Jersey's expungement process. And as you'll discuss today, the law creates a petition process for clean slate expungement for residents who have not committed an offense in 10 years and who have not been convicted of the most serious offenses. But here's the thing, equally important, the bill also requires the state to implement an automated clean slate expungement system. And it requires that the low-level marijuana convictions that we talked about and that Governor Murphy spoke about a moment ago are sealed upon the disposition of a case. By sealing these convictions, we're taking a big step toward addressing those discriminatory impacts that our drug laws have had in our Black and brown communities. But to truly make expungement work, and you touch on this, Governor, in your opening remarks, we need to raise public awareness. Until those automated systems are up and running, until they're in place, it's incumbent upon all of us, including the volunteer lawyers you talked about, the prosecutors, all the stakeholders who are involved in this process in trying to get it right, to raise awareness. Because we have seen in other states that have expungement laws, that have systems in place, including in Michigan, there was a recent Harvard study, the uptake rate, which they refer to as the people taking advantage on the first time when they're eligible, in Michigan was 6.5%. We've got to do better here in New Jersey. We've got to create that awareness. So I am committed to working with you, Governor, working with others on this call to participate as we can in those seminars to get the word out, to ensure that folks know how this process works, know that it's there for them, know that we're here to give people a hand at this difficult moment in their lives to help them succeed. And know that we are ramping up, even in the midst of COVID, all these systems. Some of the implementation deadlines have been delayed a little bit by this pandemic, but we are hiring at the state police. We're building out those systems. We're building out the automated systems, working with the Administrative Office of Courts and others to make sure that we are setting people up for success, not failure, when they leave our prison systems. And if we do that, and if we do it together like we are on this call and we have in working on this legislation, I am so confident that those cycles will be broken for so many more people, because that's what I think justice requires of all of us right now in this moment, in the historical moment in which we find ourselves. And it presents New Jersey an opportunity to be a leader for the rest of the country, like we've been on so many issues, but especially on this critically important issue. So, Gov, I'm thrilled to join you this afternoon, and I'm thrilled to be a partner in your efforts and the efforts of others on this webinar this afternoon, and to raise awareness and to make this a reality for people who deserve this opportunity.
Thank you, General. And I'm so grateful for all of your engagement on some of these issues. Would it be possible just to share with us a little bit how you see it unfolding with, obviously, the state police and the Attorney General's office, just so that, and we all recognize the impact of COVID and financial challenges. Could you just outline for us just a very broad sketch what you see as the time benchmarks?
Sure. Some of these deadlines had to be pushed back because of COVID. We need to hire up more people to work on these issues. Some of these systems are not fully automated, but we have been working on that from a sort of a programming perspective. But what's that, Gov?
No, from a systemic challenge perspective.
Yeah, it's listen, a lot of these records just at a basic level are paper records. And so, we're undertaking the effort to get them digitized. We're undertaking the effort so we can more quickly speak with the courts and their systems and have all of our systems align. And, you're dealing with the challenge, as you know, of legacy computer systems. And so we're committed, the governor's committed, and I'm hopeful in this budget cycle that the monies that we need to make this a reality, because it's going to cost money, but it's an investment. It's an investment in setting folks up for success. So the $15 or $16 million that's called for in this budget is needed. It's needed for the systems. It's needed for the people. And more importantly, we have a backlog already under our current expungement system. So we need to keep that moving. And what we don't want to have is delay on our side, preventing somebody from taking advantage of a job opportunity, or missing a housing opportunity, or missing an opportunity to move their life forward. So, we've spoken offline. We've spoken to a lot of folks. The Colonel is committed to this. I am committed to this. The administration is committed to making this a success. And we're ramping up and working with our Civil Service Commission to get all these postings out there and folks onboarded, even in the midst of a pandemic, because we need, especially now, in the midst of two once-in-a-lifetime pandemics, I hope. The one calling for, bringing to light racial injustice, and the COVID-19 pandemic, which intersect at so many different levels. Right now, we need to be doing everything possible to make sure that we're giving people all the support they need to succeed. So those are some of the challenges, but we're working on it. We have plans in place to meet the slight extension that we've gotten until February to hit some of these deadlines and make them a reality.
So I just want to thank you and for the outreach to the advocacy community, to bringing this all together and to having these conversations so that we work in sync, and also for your support for a number of the other issues that you addressed in your remarks. So we look forward to working with you and partnering with you in our own efforts. So thanks, General.
Thanks, Gov.
Thanks. And so now, if I may, I'd like to turn to our state Senate President, Steve Sweeney, who, God willing, is with us. This technology as a Luddite is significantly over my bandwidth. Is our Senate President there?
Hey, Gov, this is Jack from Senator Sweeney's office. I don't see him on yet. I'm going to reach out and try and find where he is. Okay, great. I appreciate that, Jack. So if we can, as Jack is lining up the Senate President, could I just also call upon Larry Lusberg, our friend, and if Larry can talk about why this law was needed and what the significance of the law is in terms of past expungement efforts and the major provisions of the law, what it did in terms of clean slate, what it did to low-level drug offenses. Larry?
Thanks, Governor. So I think it's important to remember just how historic the trend has been over the last couple of years. A few years ago, Governor McGreevey came to me and we started to work on expungement issues. And by the way, let me say something about Governor McGreevey in this regard. He is the hero of this movement. And when he thinks about reentry, he doesn't just think about the reentry centers that NJRC runs. He doesn't just think about the individual needs of the many people for whom I know, because I speak to him every weekend. He's on the way to Costco to buy them socks or underwear. But also he thinks in that global sense that has gotten us to a great extent where we are on a number of legislative initiatives that aren't directly relevant in some ways to reentry in the way that expungement is, but in which he thinks about systemic change. Expungement is an example of New Jersey systemic change. And whatever disagreements I may at times have with the Attorney General, this administration and this Attorney General have been enormously...
Now, he just said all these nice things about Larry Lussberg before, so be nice.
Yeah. Has been incredible in terms of what we've accomplished over the last couple of years. A few years ago, New Jersey was one of the worst states in the country, behind places like Kansas and Kentucky and Louisiana and Utah, with regard to how long it took to get an expungement and how hard it was to do it. New Jersey in those days, these long ago days of 2018, we had to wait for 10 years to get expungements in New Jersey. The first bill got it down to 6, and this bill got it down to 5. Let me stop, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about what this bill does, but let's talk about the importance of all of this. One of the other hats I wear is I'm the chair of the New Jersey State Advisory Committee of the U.S. Civil Rights Commission. And that civil rights, and we are about to embark on hearings to talk about the disabilities that emanate from hardships and from the results of convictions in New Jersey, whether it be because of fines and forfeitures or whether it be because of occupational licensing issues, such as those that the Attorney General just mentioned. Expungements alleviate that hardship. If you do not have a record, and if it's clear that you don't have to report that record, you have educational opportunities, you have employment opportunities, you have housing opportunities, you have licensing opportunities, and so many more opportunities that wouldn't otherwise be there, but for the fact that you had a conviction. So expungement directly addresses those concerns. And that's something that Governor McGreevey brought to the legislature, brought to the executive branch, and really through his own personal energy and charisma really made happen. And we have had extraordinary legislative leadership that's resulted in just really thoroughgoing reform of the expungement process in New Jersey. And that process is so important because, as the Attorney General said, mass incarceration is the front end. The back end is what happens to people when they leave. It is terrible how many people are incarcerated. It is terrible in New Jersey how many of those people are African American. But it's not enough to just reduce all of that, to have sentencing reform that many on this call have worked on and that the Attorney General mentioned. It's as important that we take care of what happens to the people who are coming out. And so it's with that in mind that we talk about these expungement provisions. But it seems like it might be time to bring in the Senate President.
I don't know if the Senate President is with us yet, but if he is, he could jump on. But
There he is.
Stephen,
Just got here.
thank you, my friend.
Sorry.
No, you've got a few other obligations. It's not often that that Larry Lussberg is the warm-up act for the Senate President. So and Mike Tyson was his warm-up for the Attorney General. So this all works. But Steve, can you just talk a little bit, and the General talked about where this was in terms of second chance, and Larry talked about how significant this was. Could I just ask you, like on a real human basis, what was your leadership and your personal involvement with Senator Cunningham on this bill? Like, what motivated you, and why did you think New Jersey needed to do this?
Jim, it's personal motivation is just to do the right thing. What's going on is not right. And it's embarrassing, to be perfectly honest with you, that, we could do better. It's like, Governor, when I spoke to Larry and spoke to Senator Sandra Cunningham, it's about doing better because we're failing. And, I'm a huge believer in reentry, and not because I'm on this call, but because it actually makes a huge difference. That's why we need to fund it in the budget, which we intend to. Governor, we tend to make sure funding's in place, but it's doing right by, reentry. Again, reentry is critically important to me. I'm a believer in it. When I was a young guy, I remember, and I think I told you this, I was in charge of my apprenticeship program.
You did.
I was in charge. And when people would check the box saying they were incarcerated, I didn't even look at those guys. I'm embarrassed by it, but that was the truth. So, coming around, putting a committee together to make sure that this works properly and that we're providing everything the way we're supposed to be providing it, like I said, it was common sense.
I also appreciate what your brother has done, what Rich has done in terms of bringing people that have a history of have a criminal jacket into the union, giving them an opportunity, apprenticeships, and he's seen it up front. But bluntly, not everybody as enlightened as Rich is, and so that's why expungement is so critically important. Could you, and maybe you or Larry, talk about the clean slate? I mean, one of the things that's significant is what Senator Cunningham and you did, saying that if you've had a clean record for 10 years, you get to wipe that clean. And I mean, that is, and Larry, maybe you can just give us some context about how different that is in terms of the history of New Jersey with all of these various waiting periods.
You're freezing. I think you're off. You're frozen off.
Yeah. Steve, do you want to go first on clean slate?
I can't. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay. Let's be clear. As I mentioned up front, when we first embarked on this, and when Senator Sweeney says what we had was wrong, what he's referring to, in part, is that we just had this very regressive expungement system. With the clean slate provision, we now have literally the best expungement laws in the country in many ways. I mean, there are no other states that have what we have now on the books, which is an ability after a period of time to not just expunge a conviction, but to expunge an entire record. Senator Sweeney talked a little bit about how we had a meeting with him and with Senator Cunningham, and her commitment to this cause it couldn't be more important. She was intent on making expungement meaningful, and her view was that to expunge one conviction or two convictions wasn't going to do it. That what we needed to do was give people an opportunity to expunge all their convictions, so they had a true clean slate, and we call that the Cunningham cleanser. It's amazing. I mean, what it means is that if after 10 years after your most recent conviction or release from prison or payment of fine, whatever the latest of those things is, that you can, if you've had no subsequent offenses, that you can wipe your slate clean and get a true new fresh start. And the governor's office improved it by requiring that it be automated. That is not yet in effect. But in the meantime, until that happens, people can go about getting their records as a whole expunged. There is no other state that has such a meaningful opportunity to do that. There are other states that have expungement provisions, but ours now, as a result of the leadership of this legislature and of the governor's office, has made this literally the best regime in the country. And when Steve Sweeney says it was the right thing to do, that was always what people talked about. Let's just do the right thing. That's what he talked about. That's what Senator Cunningham talked about. They just wanted to do the right thing. And it doesn't always happen in our politics, but that's what happened here.
And I would just ask the Senate President if you could talk a little bit about your partnership with Senator Cunningham on some of these issues.
Well, the champion of second chance in this state, I mean, a lot of people believe in it, but she lives and breathes it. Sandy is a champion, and you know I love her. She's just once she puts her mind down to something, we get it done. If you remember, we went up to Newark. I came up north. We met in Newark, and we started talking about, well, what about this and what about that? And I said, well, what about if we do it better than anyone else? You know, like instead of piecemealing it, if you remember, we said, let's think big. Let's go long, and that's what we did. And again, I'm a believer. I'm an iron worker by trade, and I was always taught if you can't do it, you can't stay. Well, if you really want to make change and you really want to make a difference, well, then make it. Do it. Just don't dance around the edges. Because the other thing is, especially you, Governor, whenever
It's got a little.
He's frozen for me.
Yeah, it's frozen.
whenever we have a good idea, everyone tries to kill it. Whether it's them, we did something. We are the national model for expungement. The national model. There's not another state in the country that's as progressive as we are when it comes to this. I got to tell you, I'm damn proud of that. Because when you said, Jim, about my brother, the guys we take that needed a second chance, they turn out to be getting a second chance at a better life, and they don't want to go back. But if we don't create a situation where they can move forward, like restoring voting rights and doing all the stuff that we're doing to make us someone that made a mistake. And oh, by the way, I don't think there's anybody on this call at one time or another that might not have made a mistake that they are just happy they didn't get caught at. You know what I mean? I know I'm one of them. So again, I just think doing the right thing and looking at it differently, that like we can save a lot of money in government we can save a whole lot of money in government by putting people back to work and making them productive citizens. Hey, listen, we still got a lot of work to do. Our criminal justice system is lacking in, we passed laws about job training. They're not living up to the laws that we passed. But at the end of the day, Sandy Cunningham, there's not a greater champion in the state. Because look, ban the box, bail reform, the clean slate that we just did. I would put that package, the package of legislation on second chance that we put up, I'd put that up against any place else in the country and dare them to beat us. And we're not done.
Thank you, Senate President. And just to echo your words, Collateral Consequences, which is a national criminal justice clearinghouse, said New Jersey did have the most progressive track record of legislation as to criminal justice, penal reform. So I just want to express our gratitude to you, and also for the Reentry Services Commission and the upcoming Women Reentry Services Commission. So I just want to say thank you to you and Senator Cunningham and even Larry Lusberg for all that Larry does every day of the week, 24/7, and suffering through me and his all too generous comments. But thank you, Senate President.
Governor, and I'll let you go, but we really got to pay attention. It's a national embarrassment that the federal government had to take over the only female corrections unit in the state, and women are being, I think if there's 60% more incarcerated than they were like 30 years ago.
Yes.
So we really need to focus on what went wrong and how we get people right. I don't know if you saw the article the other day about a mother that was an addict, had issues, went to jail. Her kid was going to college someplace, and she wanted to get an internship, and she couldn't get the internship because the mother had a felony conviction. And, it was a law enforcement job at a police department. And so, we really, as we're launching into this, I think we're scratching the surface. I mean, Jim, you've done a great job, Larry. There's just so much more we can do here. And it's rethinking, going from, think about back in the 90s, lock them up and throw away the key, to where we're actually looking at people as human beings and realizing they have value, that they made a mistake, and we're getting back on their feet and putting back in the getting back in the economy, being productive citizens. So I really appreciate everything that everyone's doing on this call. And again, you can count me in when we can come up with other ideas to even move the ball further.
And I just want to thank you for your leadership on addiction and also on not precluding those with serious crimes from consideration for second chances, which is so important. We're going to have a whole discussion about young guys predominantly making really bad decisions in their 17 to 25, and unfortunately, because of near suffering that for 30 years. But thank you.
Thank you, Governor.
For all you do.
Thanks,
so we're going to, with your blessing, we're going to start talking about the law. And I guess first up, I'd like to call upon Felipe, Executive Director of Legal Services for New Jersey. And Felipe will be joined with Elizabeth. Felipe, you're on.
In this program, and Sandy for her lifelong commitment to this. My name is Felipe Chavana. I am the Executive Director of Essex Newark Legal Services. Essex Newark Legal Services has a long history of helping low-income people obtain expungements of their records. But Essex Newark Legal Services only serves Essex County. There are other legal services programs covering each of New Jersey's 21 counties. And the Legal Services of New Jersey has a statewide hotline. The number is 888-576-5529. Again, the hotline number is 888-576-5529. You can also access information on the expungement statute by Googling Legal Services of New Jersey or at enls@lsnj.org.
So, Felipe, are you going to share with us the slides?
Yes. And so now I want to turn over the program to Elizabeth Dwelling.
And before you do that, Felipe, I just want to say thank you to you. I want to say thank you to Legal Services. I want to say thank you to Volunteer Lawyers for Justice, the ACLU, because they are our partners. And I mean this as a compliment. You're the elder statesman. So you've been doing this for quite a few years, and I just want to express my gratitude.
Right. In the early 1980s, I co-authored the self-help guide to expungement.
I know that. I still use it.
Now being used to this date by the judiciary.
Exactly. I think it was the 1880s, Felipe, but that's...
It really was. Okay, Elizabeth, come take my chair.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And Elizabeth works on this day in and day out, so thank you so much.
Good afternoon, friends, seen and unseen. I'm so happy for this opportunity to talk about my favorite topic, which is expungements. Now, I'm going to try this afternoon to familiarize the participants with the expungement requirements, but with a special emphasis on the centerpiece of the new law, which is the absolute game changer, which is the clean slate provision. There are other types of expungements with different requirements and different waiting periods, but I'm not going to muddy the waters by going into all of that at this
point. We're going to talk to Steve Hunter later on, so you're right on message.
Yes, and I'd also like to emphasize the lsnjlaw.org website, because that has, under the Clearing Your Record Online heading, many valuable resources, including an expungement eligibility interview, and also the Clearing Your Record Online booklet. The new version, many generations removed from the original one with Mr. Chavana's, but a very, very, very good resource. It actually has forms in it to fill out for different parts of the expungement process, and it tells how to fill out those forms. So I highly recommend that as well. Now, the first thing a person needs to do who is intent upon getting an expungement is to find out what's on their record. That is job one. Gather any records that you may have at home. Contact any courts where you may have had a case. Look in the New Jersey Municipal Court database, which if you simply put in New Jersey Municipal Court case search in Google, it will lead you to that database. You can also go to the New Jersey State Police website, njsp.org, for information on getting the record that matches your fingerprints. All of this information will be needed to determine if you are eligible, and if you are eligible, you will need that information to put it into your petition for expungement, because you will need such things as specifics of dates of arrest, charges, complaint numbers, disposition, sentence, etc. Now, what is on this record that you have assembled? Let's first mention that if you have motor vehicle cases, they cannot be expunged. If you have out-of-state cases, New Jersey courts cannot expunge them. And federal charges, for the most part, are not able to be expunged either. But let's assume we don't have any of those things at all. What we need to do next is see, do we have dismissals or do we have convictions? If we simply have dismissals, we are eligible. And there is no limit to the number of dismissals that can be expunged. And generally, there is no waiting period. You can have a dismissal for a very serious charge, such as murder. If it's dismissed, you can still expunge it. Next, if we have a conviction, is it on the list of crimes that cannot be expunged? And again, we want to emphasize throughout, the question is not what you were charged with initially, but what you are convicted of. As an example, I could be charged with robbery, which is not able to be expunged, yet perhaps I pled guilty to theft, which can be expunged. So this is a huge difference, and it underscores the importance of obtaining your records, so you're not just going on your memory or your best guess of what you were convicted of, because these distinctions may not sound large, but they are huge game changers in terms of eligibility potentially. Some felonies that you might think cannot be expunged actually can be. Things such as weapons possession, even firearms, aggravated assault, terroristic threats, these things can actually be expunged. So it is important to know for certain what is on the non-expungible list of crimes. I'm going to read you that list right now because it's very, very, very important. And in order to get a clean slate expungement, you cannot have a conviction from this list. And again, this list is also in the Clearing Your Record online booklet that I referred to earlier. The list of non-expungible crimes is as follows: murder, aggravated manslaughter, and manslaughter, kidnapping, human trafficking, luring or enticing, sexual assault and aggravated sexual assault, aggravated criminal sexual contact, criminal sexual contact if the victim is a minor, criminal restraint and false imprisonment if the victim is a minor and the offender is not the parent, robbery, arson, terrorism, endangering the welfare of a child by engaging in sexual conduct or causing the child other harm, child pornography, perjury and false swearing. Any attempt to commit those crimes or conspiracy to commit those crimes also is not expungible. If a person has a felony conviction and they have been holding public office, if the felony involved that office, that cannot be expunged either. A second or first degree felony conviction for sale, distribution, or possession with intent to sell drugs cannot be expunged. Now, most CDS offenses, I'm saying controlled dangerous substances offenses, are not first or second degree. Most are third degree. You pretty much have to be El Chapo in order to have a first or second degree conviction. So most likely, with a drug conviction will not be on the non-expungible list.
Elizabeth?
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about what would be helpful, because I'm just sensitive to time. And could you talk a little bit about the clean slate as opposed to drug offenses?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm going to talk about now. Okay, and please, Guy, your conviction is not on the list of non-expungible offenses, because that is the main requirement for clean slate eligibility. The clean slate eligibility allows a person's entire record of felony convictions and misdemeanor convictions, regardless of how many, to be expunged. There is no limit to how many convictions can be expunged under the clean slate provisions.
That literally means clean slate.
It literally means clean slate, but one has to wait 10 years from the completion of their last sentence. In other words, the sentence for their last conviction. That 10 years has to pass. As long as the 10 years has passed and you don't have anything on the non-expungible list that I read from extensively, you are good to go to get a clean slate expungement. Now, currently, in order to obtain a clean slate expungement, you have to follow the regular expungement filing process. Before you file, always make sure you don't have any pending cases or open warrants, because no expungement will go through with an open case or a pending warrant. You have to make sure the warrants are cleared and the cases are all disposed. When you're ready to put your petition together, you can go to the lsnjlaw.org website, look at the Clearing Your Record online, and follow the instructions in the booklet. That will lead you step by step by step. It tells you how to fill out the forms and when to fill them out. Because you don't just file a petition and get an expungement. It's not that simple. There are many steps involved. Basically, you'll be filing the petition in the county where the last conviction occurred. You serve agencies with the notice and copies of your petition. You'll provide proof of service to either the court or the prosecutor. And at the end of the process, you'll be serving copies of the final order on those same agencies. This takes time, a lot of time. Before the judge even looks at your petition, a number of agencies, including the state police and the prosecutor, have been reviewing their records that they have on you. And they're looking to see if you are eligible or not and making their positions known. All these agencies were backed up with cases before the pandemic, and since then it's only gotten worse. It's not unheard of for a case to actually take several years to make its way through the completion.
So I think, if I can, Elizabeth, what the advantage of the clean slate, what we heard from the Attorney General and what we heard from the Senate President, is that there's a movement afoot that as of February, hopefully that the synchronization of records will be there, the background checks, increased staffing with the state police, so that we should be able to address, I mean, the goal, the objective is to not only address the backlog, but to move expeditiously on filings. Is that correct?
Yes, and the next step is the automated clean slate process, so that after 10 years, all records will be expunged. A person will not have to file a petition in order for that to come about and have to go through all
the act of God, but yes.
Yes, indeed. That's pretty much it.
Okay, so if I could jump over to one, I just want to say thank you to Felipe, and I want to say thank you to Elizabeth for focusing in on specifically the clean slate. I would like to ask Karen Robinson, who hopefully is with us, Karen, to talk about the other aspects within the bill. And so, as Felipe mentioned, that includes CDS, also disorderly. Is Karen with us?
Yes. Hi, Governor. How are you?
Hey, Karen. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me.
About the other. So when you look at the bill as the Senate President and as the Attorney General described it, I mean, it has certain specific sections. I mean, I want to thank Elizabeth and I want to thank Felipe and the Senate President for focusing on clean slate, which, as Larry said, is landmark. But there are other aspects of the bill that are critically important, including CDS, and maybe if you could also comment on the other crimes and what are the lengths of stay and the amount of crimes that could be considered for potential expungement.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Karen Robinson, and I'm a senior staff attorney with Volunteer Lawyers for Justice, or VLJ for short.
And I just want to thank both you and Legal Services. You guys do God's work, and in terms of, you're going to hear from Rahat Chada, our general counsel, but it's all about partnerships. So Legal Services, and I still use Felipe's old step-by-step and volunteer. I can't thank you guys enough, and I just want the Attorney General and the Senate President all to hear it's you guys in the trenches that do the great work. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, I so appreciate you saying that, because it is the valuable partnerships that we have with New Jersey Reentry Corporation, with law firms like Gibbons, that makes this work possible. And it's so astonishing to me to hear from our Attorney General share that of those who are eligible for expungement, only like 6% of folks reached out to utilize that service. And I think the clean bill slate, eventually when it becomes automatic, really addresses that core issue, because as Elizabeth from Legal Services was explaining the process, the petition process, still is tremendously arduous and difficult to navigate between the collection of your background to the service requirements on all of the parties that are required notice, the filing, all of that makes it tremendously difficult and really underscores why so many petitioners still desperately need volunteer attorneys to assist them with this. And so VLJ, for the past 19 years, we've been serving low-income individuals and families with a variety of legal services issues throughout the state, including criminal record expungement through our release program. And the services that we offer range from free legal seminars to limited scope advisory clinics and full representation of cases for individuals who are currently eligible to expunge their record. And so I just want to put out there that for any attorneys that are watching today's presentation and who are interested in taking up this cause and helping be part of the solution, if you're interested in learning more about how to do expungement, I encourage you to get involved with VLJ. We have training materials, CLE trainings, sample forms, sample petitions, and plenty of clients who could use your help. So please find us, reach out to us. Our website is vljnj.org. We're on Facebook, or call us 973-645-1955. And the same goes for clients. If you're listening today and you're thinking, okay, this all sounds great, but now what? Now how do I get the help that I need? Contact us because, again, as we talked about, some of these changes that are coming up will eventually make it automatic for you to expunge your record, but those automatic systems are not in place yet. And so there are abilities to still get the relief that you so desperately need through a petition. And an attorney is well-versed and well-skilled at crossing all those T's, dotting all those I's, and that's really what's required of the petition process. And so just to address your question, Governor McGreevy, regarding some of the other changes, aside from Clean Bill, we heard earlier from Larry about the reduction in the waiting period for an indictable crime offense, also known in every other state as a felony conviction. It had been at one time 10 years, which now is the clean slate period. But it was so hard, even just to get one indictable off, you had to wait 10 years. That was reduced from.
And I think that goes to the Senate President's point that was a seismic change. So 10 years for one indictable offense to 10 years for a clean slate is a significant shift.
Absolutely. And then, so it went down to 6, and now under the new law, it's down to 5. There is an early pathways. It used to be a public interest standard that you had to meet in order to get it down even lower to 4. That standard, that public interest standard, has also been changed under the new law to compelling circumstances. Now, obviously, we don't have any case law yet as to what will be the factors to look at for compelling circumstances. But certainly, the public interest standard provides some guidance. Things like the nature of the violation, the character and conduct of the petitioner, and the undue burden or hardship that having the record puts on the petitioner.
Can you talk a little bit about CDS and marijuana offenses and how this bill impacts? And we're going to talk a little bit later to Steve Hunter, of Drug Court Director at Drug Court per se, but could you just also talk about the CDS offenses?
Yeah, so CDS offenses, again, has been dramatically altered in this new expungement bill. So convictions for certain marijuana-related offenses will be eligible for automatic expungement, again, when the automated system is in place, with no limit on the number of convictions. And this obviously is going to be a big game changer too for certain types of marijuana or hashish convictions. Also in terms of number of convictions too, I just want to also point out that disorderly persons convictions, again, known in every other state as a misdemeanor conviction or a petty disorderly persons conviction, that number increased. So we have a reduced waiting period on one side, and we actually have an increased limit from, it had previously been 4 disorderly persons, now it's up to 5 disorderly persons under the standard traditional expungement petition.
And so, my sense, Karen, is that with a lot of our guys and gals historically, they didn't want to go through the process because there were so many limitations, both as to time, types of offenses, the number of offenses. And so, literally, we would hold expungement seminars with Senator Cunningham, and people would get up and walk out, and I'd say, "Why are you leaving?" And they're like, "Jim, I'm dealing with one offense or maybe two offenses, and it's not going to clean my jacket." And so I think the point you're making here is that the law not only is to the clean slate to which you and Elizabeth referred to, but the law itself, in and of itself, aside from the clean slate, is far more expansive and far quicker in terms of offenses considered for expungement.
Right. Everything that's now trying to make it more automatic takes the burden off of the petitioner, who is vastly the scales are much more in favor of the state in terms of access to this information or knowledge about this law. It sort of shifts that imbalance of power. So another change under the prior law was that expungement of dismissals were permissible, but you had to request it. The burden was on the defendant to request that. The benefit of that was that it wasn't a petition based. It became like a form, but still, it was very frustrating. I've heard from even judges; they were frustrated that that they had colleagues who from the bench weren't making defendants aware of this. Now it'll actually be automatic. Once we're up and running.
If I have a historical criminal jacket and I want to be expunged, and whether I'm looking at Volunteers Lawyers for Justice or I'm looking at legal services with Felipe and with Elizabeth, what happens? I mean, we've got the phone number. I walk into the door, and can you tell me? And I should have asked this of Felipe. I mean, I consider him the Moses of this movement. But what literally happens? So Jim McGreevy walks into the door. I've gotten out of Northern State, say 7 years ago. I have my jacket. I walk in. Could you just literally, not to be so pedestrian, but tell me what happens?
Absolutely. So you're not walking into any office right now. Our offices are all remotely. And if you did walk in, you wouldn't be a knucklehead. You'd be wearing a mask. But we're all remote now. So what you would do is you would call us. You would call us at 973-645-1955. That's our main telephone number. You'll speak to one of our terrific legal assistants who will conduct an intake with you. And that intake basically just screens you for purposes of free legal services. We do serve exclusively low-income individuals. And if you are, and we're very liberal with that as well. We're very understanding that we're in an economic crisis. And so we're very, again, liberal with that. If you are, however, over our income, we make referrals accordingly. But if you are eligible for free legal services, the next step is then to sign you up for one of our free legal clinics. So we have monthly legal clinics where volunteer attorneys, pro bono, for free attorneys, meet one-on-one with clients to discuss their criminal background. We utilize some of the public access databases that Elizabeth mentioned to try to find some information about your record. Obviously, if the individual has documents, not everyone does, but if you do have documents, you would submit them in advance so that the volunteers can review it with you and advise you accordingly. They're up to date on the law, so they'll advise you under your eligibility as the law currently is written, and for any anticipation of any future changes, so that maybe if you're not eligible right now, maybe you're eligible, hopefully in the near future. And then if your case is eligible, ideally the volunteer from the clinic will take your case for full representation, meaning that they would start the drafting of the petition on your behalf. Otherwise, if not them, again, we have tremendous relationships. I'm looking to Larry at Gibbons, where we have volunteer attorneys from a wide variety of backgrounds take on these cases for full representation. And again, they do it from the soup to nuts, from the filing of the petition to receiving the final order, and then serving that final order, which is a very important last piece of this, onto all the agencies so that they can actually follow through with that decision and actually expunge the records from all their organizations or entities. So,
and if you were Karen, sort of described it, excuse my coarseness, in terms of big buckets. So there's clean slate, and I think Elizabeth went through this relatively thoroughly. There's clean slate, 10 years. There's CDS, and then there's sort of the ordinary course of dispositions of crimes and misdemeanors. So, I mean, could you talk a little bit about, we talked a little bit about CDS, but could you talk about how this bill impacted time deadlines and numbers of crimes? for expungement, for potential expungement?
Yeah, so again, the clean bill was really the game changer in terms of the numbers. If you were precluded in other sections of the expungement statute due to having exceeded the number of convictions, the clean bill now is sort of going to take care of all of that after the passage of the 10-year mark. In terms of the other segments of the new bill, I think what's also very important is also to recognize that it had been a very strict requirement that the end of your sentence included your custodial sentence, meaning jail or prison time, probation or parole, or fine payment. And for low-income individuals, it was that fine payment that lingered indefinitely. And so we see a lot of, the new law just reiterates that there are exceptions to that. If the last part of your sentence that remains is that fine payment, you can still apply for expungement. There's still, different exceptions that may apply for you.
And could you just touch base briefly on juveniles and out-of-state crimes?
Right. So juveniles, contrary to public belief, and I think before I started in this line of work, I was probably guilty of this too. A lot of folks think that juvenile records are automatically expunged or sealed. Yeah, exactly. And that's not the case. And honestly, I'm seeing with more frequency juvenile matters appearing on adult criminal records, on fingerprinting backgrounds. So I would just put that, that public service announcement out there that if you do have a juvenile record, particularly if you have an adjudicated delinquency, so basically the equivalent of an adult conviction, that you can and should seek expungement of that. And there's a specific, section of the expungement law that we have that talks about juvenile matters. They are treated differently in some ways as the traditional expungement of an adult record, but it can be done in conjunction with an adult record, and I would advocate that it should be done in conjunction. In terms of CDS too, just thinking about juveniles, there are reduced waiting periods for young drug offenders. So some of the 5-year marks that we're talking about, again, I'll be the first to admit, I've had clients say to me, oh gosh, well, that's really so unfortunate that I have to wait so long when I was only, 20 at the time that this happened. And I'm so grateful that they mentioned their date of birth, because then it triggers for me the young drug offenders exception. And so please, be mindful of that. And then, I'm sorry, Governor.
Out of
state. So Elizabeth mentioned that it is a state statute, so we cannot expunge out-of-state records. You do have to discuss with an attorney or legal services provider in that state to see whether they even have expungement. As Larry said, not every state offers relief or the same type of relief. So you'd have to consult with an attorney that knows that law. And for purposes of expungement, when we talk about things like number of permissible offenses under certain areas of the law, we do have to take into account those out-of-state convictions. And so it's important, if you're working again with a lawyer or you're doing these forms on your own, you have to disclose those out-of-state. And trust me, that the state prosecutor will find them. So it's on you to disclose it in advance, and then we'll calculate it to determine whether you're eligible to expunge those New Jersey matters. So they get disclosed, but they don't get expunged in the New Jersey petition.
Yeah, and I think it's so important for a lot of the gals and guys that we work. Also, the importance of expunging arrests that don't necessarily lead to conviction is also another critical component. I think people think juvenile records miraculously dissipate as well as arrests, when that, in fact, isn't true in terms of chronicling somebody's jacket. You just speak to that?
Oh, absolutely. For all the reasons why we hear that expungement is so beneficial and life-changing relief in terms of employment and housing stability, when a landlord or an employer runs a background check and sees these offenses, they're not always as sophisticated to read through and to see that that charge was ultimately dismissed. And so you're getting sort of the black mark against you for something that shouldn't be held against you. And so I'm so grateful that New Jersey now, moving forward, will automatically dismiss, through no onus on the defendant or petitioner to have to request, hey, can I get this expunged? It should be done automatically. So that isn't left. So many people are amazed to see that dismissals that are achieved through a diversionary program like PTI, they're shocked that still appears on their record. And so absolutely, if you have...
So that's why this conversation is so important, even if we can drive that message, so people have an awareness as whether it's PTI, whether it's arrest, whether it's juvenile, that they need to be part of this process.
Yes.
I just want, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, again, that point is like worth repeating just because of how many folks are unaware of that. They were either told that it was going to be dismissed and that transferred over to not appearing on the record, but it does appear on the record. And again,
and then I just wanted to open up to Felipe or Elizabeth or yourself or Linda about the idea of are expunged crimes considered in sentencing as to potentially future crimes? Did you want to address that question? Karen or Felipe?
No, that I would say someone who works in the criminal law area should address those questions.
Karen, did you want to address that?
No, I've done so much talking. Yeah, I agree with Felipe. My short answer is yes, but I'll let maybe a criminal practitioner weigh in.
Did Linda want to weigh in, or Larry?
I'm not that, Governor, but I'll sound in and say the answer is probably yes. Right, the information is still available to prosecutors. Judges can consider it. Look, judges can even consider arrests that don't result in convictions, which is a whole different problem and a conversation for another day. But the short answer is, if you have an expungement and then are subsequently convicted of a crime, it most likely will be considered as a sentencing factor.
So, I mean, I think that. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And I was going to say, Linda Foster here, president of the ACDL, Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, as well as an assistant federal public defender. And so we haven't talked much about the federal side. In all reality, from a federal standpoint, your conviction, even if it wasn't it would be considered by the prosecutor and probably by the judge as well. And in terms of, I know we're not talking about federal crimes. I wish the federal side would catch up with the state side. But unfortunately, in the federal arena, not much can be expunged, if any at all. We'll mention just one area that could be expunged in federal law. So for all intents and purposes, if you have a federal conviction, it cannot be expunged.
Thank you. I mean,
However, there is an exception.
Yeah, Governor, let me just say something about what Linda's point.
Go ahead,
Linda.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, no, go ahead, Linda.
I was just going to. I was just going to mention the one exception, which is under the possession 2044. If you have gotten a conditional discharge for that crime and you are under the age of 21 at the time of the offense, then that is the one time and the one exception that you can get that charge expunged. So that it almost has to be sort of this really small area of your life at the time. So not many people are under 21 at the time and also had a conditional discharge. And so those crimes typically happen. You're not charged in federal court with the minor drug offenses, but we do have a small area where some individuals are charged with maybe marijuana, a minor drug offense, on a federal property such as Sandy Hook Beach or the VA hospital or something like that. But there is that small area.
Thank you, Linda, and I want to thank President Foster for her advocacy and always being with us. I'm sorry to cut off Larry or Mary. Did you want to add something?
Let me just say something to follow up on Linda, who has I love her background as a federal public defender and ACDL president. I know other people. So this.
I thought you were going to comment on Alex's beard, but that's not.
Yeah, his beard is nice. Let me just say it's an outrage, but it's the truth that in most of the United States, there does not exist any ability to get a federal expungement, the expungement of a federal offense, leaving aside the single exception, which is a conditional discharge, and is a little different. So I've litigated this case unsuccessfully, I will say, in the Third Circuit, trying to argue that there should be a federal right to an expungement based on the court's inherent authority to control its own records. That has been rejected, and the Third Circuit said that, which is what governs us, and the Third Circuit said that in the absence of a statute, there is no expungement right, which is why all this legislation we've talked about is so very important. That is not a unanimous view of every circuit. I think the last time I checked, it's the view, though, of 9 out of 11 circuits. So, So the United States, I mean, fundamentally, for a federal crime, unless and until Congress passes a statute, and they don't pass anything, it just seems incredibly unlikely that we're going to have any expungement right, and I just don't believe this is going to be the top of anybody's legislative agenda. But who knows? I mean, the First Step Act was surprising too. So,
I believe there may have been, although I haven't followed up on it, there may have been some legislations to decriminalize the federal marijuana. Right. That's on the horizon. But again, you don't get many federal cases dealing with a small amount of marijuana, and so short of a pardon, you're sort of, you don't have much recourse on a federal level.
And a pardon, as much as certain presidents like to give them for certain people, is really very minimal relief in some ways. Right? I mean, pardons say you're forgiven. Right. They don't say your conviction doesn't exist. Yeah. An expungement is so much more significant of a remedy.
And I just wanted to pick up on what you just said, Larry, that the difference between an expungement, to go to Linda's point, a pardon. I just wanted to ask if Mary or Stephen, in terms of the New Jersey, in terms of the Public Defender's Office, or in terms of drug court, wanted to comment on how expungement impacts their work. Is Mary with us?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you for inviting me.
Hey, Mary.
Hi. Governor, I think it was great that Mike Tyson introduced the program, and he's a person who is unable to expunge his prior record.
Yeah, to go to Larry and Linda's point.
Yeah. So regarding in practice, one of the best things that came about is 52-6, which allows for automatic expungement for dismissal or acquittal. And that is done now by public defenders before files are closed if a case is dismissed, or if there's an acquittal. I can tell you that having an acquittal in a murder case is great, and then when and if that person gets rearrested and the prosecutor brings that up during a detention hearing, probably is inappropriate as well, knowing the person's background, because although you can have an expungement, you're still at the mercy of the Google machine. There's mugshots that can be found. So there's other ways for people to obtain information about individuals. But in our work, I make it a practice to tell any person who receives a diversionary program, which is also PTI, to always reach back out to me after the 6 months after receiving that dismissal order, and I will do that petition for them. I think that it's one of the most important things that we can do for a client, any client. And I regularly look at prior records to see who would be or who could qualify looking back. And I always let them know, a bar in the past was the fees that are associated with a person doing their own expungement. It's very expensive to certified mail to all of these organizations.
Man, I think that's what Pepe and Elizabeth said, yeah.
So overcoming that,
does every public defender do that, Mary? I don't want to put you on the spot.
I hope going forward that our agency begins to do it more. In the past, that is not something that we would provide, but I think as a one-stop shopping, I think that it's essential to what we do if we're going to make any changes going forward. And I know that Steve Hunter is here, and he's going to talk about drug court and the expungements that are handled by the Office of the Public Defender with drug court. But I just wanted to bring up something on the wish list, something that Alex brought up regarding prior arrests of an individual and the court considering those. That's why it's really important to expunge those, because we see all the time prior arrests on a pre-sentence report, and then you would hear the court say, well, this person has been arrested 20 times. And, it could be that that person's on the corner hanging out and they're just arrested. And then the case is dismissed and then nothing happens and then the court considers those. So it's important if they are expunged that that's not considered. And I think that if I had a wish list, I would ask that the AOC make that a requirement, not to include prior arrests in pre-sentence reports, which would align itself with the new
now,
law.
Is that discretionary, or would that have to be compelled through legislation?
I believe that the administrative office of the courts can indicate to probation officers not to include that in pre-sentence reports. I believe it would be easy as someone writing that directive, which would be consistent with the new law and the purpose and what we're doing here. And the other thing on the wish list would be maybe someday having something similar to a safe surrender, where all of us can come together in an open area and be able to do expungements and invite the public. And we can do it in, one day or over a weekend, like we did with safe surrender warrants. So since you are the man who can make things happen, I just thought I'd bring up.
Yeah, no. And what we, in the last 15 minutes of this Zoom call, what Alex talked about in terms of prior arrest and what you just mentioned in terms of AOC and safe surrender. I just would like to come up with a list of ideas that, Larry and Alex and others will grapple with on legislation. But thank you for that. Can we flip over to Steve? Steve Hunter?
Thanks, Governor.
Thanks, Steve.
For anyone doesn't know me, I'm Steve Hunter. I'm the Public Defender's Drug Court Director. Hi, Alex. Hi, Larry. We've litigated cases in the Supreme Court before together.
Hey, Steve.
I just want to talk briefly about drug court expungements. We've had a law since 2016 that has allowed essentially a clean slate expungement for everyone for a lot of people who graduate from drug court. There's some exceptions to that. It's the same list that someone was talking about today. There's actually a bill out there, S-241, is trying to fix that, but it was going to go for a vote for the full Senate a couple of weeks ago, but it got held up on that specific issue of the expungements.
But Steve, don't they have to complete drug court in order to?
They have to graduate from drug court.
Not all of our guys and gals complete drug court. They do the time, but they don't necessarily go through the phases.
Yeah, drug court, as we all know, substance use disorder is a very difficult disease to beat, and historically, only about 30% of people graduate from drug court, but it's still a significant number. I mean, we've had about almost 2,000 of these drug court expungements since 2016 that actuated, and we, this last year we had about 800, almost 900 graduates. So I mean, there's still. Part of the idea too is we're giving an incentive to people to stay in. This is a tremendous incentive, obviously, that you get essentially a clean slate expungement as you walk out the door. You don't have to wait 10 years or anything. And I mean, I've done orders, some of these orders 20 pages long, wiping away. You can imagine somebody with a serious substance use disorder could have their record going back, 20, 30 years. So, I mean, it's really, it's a great thing. There's something else I want to tell everyone about too, is because this will really affect everybody here, is that my office has been working with the AOC the last several months on developing an online expungement program that's going to work in e-courts. And we finished the pilot phase. Now we've been using it in drug court for the last 3 months. And it's unbelievable. We had a 2 to 3 month backlog in processing our orders, and we got it finished within 2 weeks. The system it automates a lot of the stuff that we were talking about before, all the hard work of gathering the records. It directly connects with the three main court databases, Promise Gavel, ACA, and FACS, which are, Superior Court, Municipal Court, and Family Court. And with a few, you enter in one, one case for the person, it scans all those databases by SBI number and puts everything on the screen like that of all the offenses. They've incorporated electronic notification of all the parties. I was told that was going to be done by the end of the year. I just found out this past Friday they put it into the system and we're going to start using it now. So when the judge issues the order, instead of having to mail it to anybody, the system itself is going to electronically notify the state police and all the different towns and all the different courts. It's a tremendous improvement, and for anyone who knows this kind of work, what a time saver. And then what's going to happen, what I've been told is that the AOC is going to put in some kind of tracking mechanism or timeline or something so that in the online system itself, we'll be able to see when it really is expunged by the particular entity, that they'll have to notify it in this, mark something in the system, and we'll be able to see all that. Because right now, that's one of the biggest challenges that I see, is that it's the backlog of really the New Jersey State Police in just, effectuate really
manpower. Yeah, exactly.
Manpower issue, because before COVID,
I think that's what Elizabeth and Felipe were referring to in the outset of the conversation.
Yeah, before COVID, it was about 5 months for the state police to actually expunge a record. So that's after you go through this whole process we're talking about, get your expungement and mail it to them. You still have to wait another 5 months before the expungement becomes reality, and that's the most important database the state police want.
Did you want to talk at all about, Steve, about what the bill does in terms of CDS? And I think Karen just touched upon it briefly.
I'm sorry, it changed to the new bill?
Yeah, in terms of the new bill, I mean, and what a welcome development it is.
Yeah, it's it's not my expertise actually, so I really work on the drug court expungements, so
sure.
I'd really defer to somebody else on that subject. But I can just tell you, I just wanted to finish with that. If we don't do something to help the state police with this backlog, which has only grown worse, it's now the backlog is about 8 months for waiting. That it's only going to get worse too as we add more types of expungement. If we don't do something about that back end and the people actually effectuating it and making it a reality, then all the changes in the law aren't really going to matter for a lot of people. So that's
Steve, I'm not going to tell Joe Krikora that you were shilling for the state police on a Zoom call, but no, I'm kidding.
No, I mean, please do. I mean, it's a small.
They need the manpower to get it done.
Yeah, they only have about 10 people doing this for the entire state for every type of expungement. I mean, we had to increase our staff at the public defender's office because of these drug court expungements. That's what we realized. We need to do the same thing for the state police. And for once, actually, and this is going to help all of us. Like, hey, I'm advocating for state police because it's actually going to really help us.
Yeah, no, it's a necessary precondition.
Yeah, we want our clients to be able to get the expungement right. We don't want them sitting around waiting. I mean, so they're literally sitting around waiting to have to apply to a job because there's just a backlog sitting, at the state police.
Yep. So I want to just shift a little bit in terms of the practical application and then call upon, Alex and Larry and Karen and Elizabeth and everybody to talk about, what should be done to improve, to tweak, in terms of next steps. But I would just ask Rahat Chadha, who's our general counsel in NJRC. Rahat, so for the 8,000 clients that come into NJRC, what's the first thing we do as, if you will, as an antecedent to expungement? I mean, what are the concerns of the clients? Rahat, are you with us?
Sure, I'm here. Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. So many of our clients who lack any form of identification upon release from incarceration. And also in addition to that, they may be unable to attend court appearances while incarcerated, pay any fines for work that they may have been sentenced to, or be subject to unresolved municipal court matters. And so all of this in turn results in suspended driving privileges. So in the short term, what our team does, and we do it very well, is to assist our program participants in removing these immediate legal obstacles that create barriers to employment. So we work with our participants to secure their MVC driver and non-driver IDs, and also remove license defects and warrants, communicating with municipal courts and other agencies as needed. But in the long term, our participants need the benefit of the expungement process. And this is to remove this major impediment to securing their desired employment. And so, we look forward to working to create a pipeline with volunteer lawyers for justice, the legal services of New Jersey, and pro bono attorneys for their benefit. Because again, in the long term, expungements are critical to the successful reintegration into society for our clients.
Thanks, Rod. And obviously, ID licenses are critical to food stamps, SNAP, to GA, to Medicaid, to establishing residency, to establishing for Medicaid income eligibility, and to do everything from getting into a shelter, employment, survival. So I just want to thank Rod and her legal team throughout NJRC sites all across central and northern New Jersey, and the 72 lawyers who volunteer to walk into municipal courts to address outstanding warrants. But to go to Rod's point, and this is why Volunteer Lawyers of America and legal service is so important. We hand off to them, and under the leadership of people like Larry Lusberg, and sort of coordinating not only in terms of the private sector law firms, but in volunteer lawyers and legal services. Larry, I just, hearing the Attorney General and hearing Steve and coarsening this pipeline from ID to expungement, are there things that we need to do institutionally? And I mean that both for the sake of NJRC, but for the people on this call to make expungements easier and more readily accessible. Larry?
Yeah, thanks, Governor. So let me just say, the people on this call from legal services, from VLJ, they're the heroes of all this because they're the ones who make this work. I mean, you guys are awesome, and it's been really great to, Karen and Munena, we've worked together. I mean, it's really, and I'm a long time supporter of Essex Newark. I was president of that board for a while, a long time ago. I think I hired Felipe, by the way. Anyway, there's a lot of, there's a lot in the new statute that requires you all to monitor it carefully and make sure it works. For example, the statute provides for automatic expungements of arrests. We don't know whether that's happening. Once the automated system comes into play, you're the ones who are going to be able to tell us whether it's actually working. There's supposed to be automatic orders of non-disclosure with regard to certain marijuana convictions. I mean, and hashish convictions. Those are, we again don't know whether that's happening. It's people who are there in the field who know whether these things are actually working. And, so you need to be talking to the people who do more legislation and to the legislature. And, you heard, Senator Sweeney, he'll listen. There are things that and Alex Shalom knows the legislative landscape better than anybody I know in New Jersey with regard to criminal justice reform. There's a lot that has to happen on the front end of criminal justice reform that all of us are working on very hard, from juvenile justice to, elimination of mandatory minimums and things that we all care about a great deal. But even in the expungement area, I think we've made tremendous progress, but we're not all the way there yet. Let me just raise a couple of areas where I think we need to push harder. Right now, a prior conviction, a single prior conviction is not disqualifying, but you're still only able to get one expungement other than clean slate. You're only allowed to get one expungement. There may be times when we need for somebody who doesn't want to wait 10 years, wants to get the expungement of 2 offenses. Why should that not be allowed? That's a tweak that we pushed hard. The Attorney General's office didn't go for it, but I think that's an area where we can make some process. Expungements now can be done even if there are outstanding fines. That's an incredible innovation. It's great because it didn't used to be the law. But the outstanding fines now get reduced to judgments, and so we have the problem that that Jim, that you've alluded to, of people coming out of prison with all these judgments, and that's very difficult for them. So that's an area where I think that there could be.
Senator Turner has a bill to address that.
Yeah. So and I have to say even on the expedited expungements for the small amounts of drugs. I think, the definition of small amounts of drugs to me is not a definition of small amounts of drugs that I adopt. So I think that's an area where there could be further reform as well. So those are just a few areas. And I will say that, we put our oar in the water on this. We made clear when we accepted, this version of the legislation that we didn't think that this was going to be our final foray into this area. So there are certainly improvements, and Alex probably has some better ideas than me.
Yeah, no, not better ones, just better looking ones, Larry. No, so let me just add one thing to your list, which is the list of disqualifying crimes is irrational. It's fear-based, it's irrational, and ultimately its roots are deeply racist. And so Beth said that it's only second and first degree crimes, and you have to be El Chapo, and that might be true to some extent if we're talking about quantities, but possession of drugs with intent to distribute within 500 feet of public housing remains a second degree crime. That is a crime that we know disproportionately targets Black and brown communities and urban residents particularly, and it's unconscionable that remains a disqualifying crime. But the truth is, the whole list, whether we're talking about sexual offenses or violent offenses, this othering of, look, the idea that we all deserve a second chance unless the thing, or none of us want to be judged by the worst thing you ever did, unless the worst thing you ever did was sexual in nature, or unless the worst thing you ever did, it doesn't make sense. If we believe in the principle that we shouldn't be judged by the worst thing we've ever done, or that people change over time, or that reform and rehabilitation and redemption are possible, then it should be true for all of us. And we should be rejecting these sort of exclusions based on crime of conviction in the expungement world, just as we should as we're dealing with mandatory minimums or rehabilitative release or any other criminal justice reform.
You're here.
Thank you. Mary, did you want to add to that?
My goodness, that was absolutely beautiful. I 100% agree. The one thing I think that is triggered is most of those offenses linked to Megan's Law. And I think that could, that's totally a correlation I see. But the 500 foot is a problem. And the one thing that I think that attorneys listening can do is be mindful of what cannot be expunged when you're looking to plead out a client, because there are other offenses that you can plead a client to that would still enable them to expunge in the future. And I think that that's also very important to understand, especially if you think you're getting a deal with the 500 foot, because it's a flat number on the second degree distribution within the 500 feet of a public park. It's the third degree if it's marijuana. So I would agree with that. And I think that attorneys can learn from looking at that list. But I would add that death by auto and vehicular homicide are expungible.
Yes. I mean, I just wanted to ask Elizabeth or Felipe if they had any thoughts for changes to the law or points to which we need to be mindful in terms of improving the law or improving the process between now and February. Felipe or Elizabeth?
Elizabeth, you're muted.
How does she unmute? Hold on.
Go ahead. Thanks, Felipe. Elizabeth?
I don't know how to unmute.
No, go ahead. Talk.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay.
Thanks.
Number one on my wish list is to get rid of the public interest, now called compelling circumstances requirement for the early expungement. It's already a requirement that the person not have a subsequent offense, a subsequent conviction, in order to trigger the quote earlier waiting period, which for the misdemeanor / CP is 3, for the felony / crime is 4. Statistical surveys will show that the further out a person is from the crime, the less they are likely to reoffend. So I think that in and of itself, the fact that the person has been 3 years out from the misdemeanor or for felony, and nothing afterwards in terms of conviction should be enough, because it's extremely burdensome to have to assemble a record of transcripts if it's a felony, pre-sentence reports, letters of good character, certificates, graduations, my volunteer work as a soccer coach, all these sorts of things that have to be put together to satisfy the earlier standard, which was public interest, and which may well now be even more difficult because the circumstances sounds to me like more than public interest. And especially if we're dealing with a pro se person who is trying to marshal these records and getting people to write letters for them, it's just a very, very, very onerous burden, and one which I think probably discourages a lot of pro se people from applying in the first place.
No,
Sorry, Governor. Just to echo that too, it would have been nicer to see a greater reduction in that reduced waiting period for all of the reasons that Beth mentioned, that it is so difficult to rise to this. You would have liked.
So what would that be?
I would like to see for an indictable crime to reduce the waiting period. Right now, under the early pathways, if you can meet these compelling circumstances, instead of the standard 5 years, you'll be eligible under 4 years. Sure. And under the disorderly persons or misdemeanors, it's a 5-year standard waiting period down to 3 years. I would like to see both of those to make it worth the petitioner's while to do all of this added showing. I would have liked to see those numbers, 1 or 2 years, after 1 or 2, 3 tops. But instead we're looking at 3 and 4. And sorry, while we're on the topic of wish lists, this point is so minor, but I think because it's minor, it often gets overlooked. And it's been like a grievance of mine since I started on expungement work, which is the local ordinance section. We've been talking a lot about indictable crimes or felonies, disorderly persons, but beneath disorderly persons or misdemeanors and petty disorderly persons, even beneath that are local ordinance violations or town or city ordinance violations. And so this is really minor stuff. And the way that the statute is currently drafted right now is that if you have these local ordinance violations on your record plus an indictable crime, you can get the indictable crime expunged, which is great. And for most people's purposes, that is the barrier that they're seeking to remove. But it's always been a little bit counterintuitive to me that the local ordinance remains on your record unless you have a very understanding prosecutor that's willing to allow it. So I would love to see that in the next. While I have the ears of all of you folks, that's something that I would love to see changed too moving forward.
To underscore what Karen is saying, because a local ordinance isn't necessarily just like drinking a beer in the park, which maybe an employer will care about or they won't care about. I could quite easily have an arrest for shoplifting that got downgraded to a local ordinance. And so on my criminal case history, it's still going to show shoplifting. Yes, it's going to show the conviction for ordinance, but that's going to scare away a lot of potential employers. So it's very
it does that. It does every week with our clients. Thank you both for that. I mean, it's CDS and it's shoplifting, and then trying to get a job at the local Walmart or trying to get a job at the local retailer. It becomes very difficult. Thank you both for that point. I just wanted to touch base with Linda or Stephen if they had any thoughts as to next steps, or if they had any ideas or suggestions as to what we need to be mindful of in this time of preparation. Linda, Steve?
I like Mary's idea of having a next step, sort of an expungement gathering. If you want to call it an expungement party, that would be great as well. When we all are able to get together, I think that because one of the I don't remember who said it in the very beginning, that the public is just not aware of things that can be expunged or how to go about things, and so they're sort of often left in the dark. It's kind of interesting that in our courtroom we will tell you if you're convicted for another DWI, this would be the penalty. If you're convicted for a third DWI, this would be a penalty. But no one says, hey, upon this conviction, you may be able to have this charge expunged. We tell them that they have a right to file an appeal, but we don't tell them that you have a right to petition for an expungement. So maybe we should be adding, a short cheat sheet of a one page that we give clients after they are sentenced, to things that they should be aware of in terms of expungement. I think that would go a long way. It would help people know or understand, because I think what happens is a lot of individuals, they're so concerned in the beginning about just getting this time past them or doing their time and being done and getting back to their families, and then once they get home and released, they're focusing on getting a job, and then it suddenly hits them why they can't get a job. And then suddenly they realize, oh, well, I didn't know I can get that erased, or I didn't know I can get that expunged, or they're too afraid to, or they think they have too many, so I think letting them know about the clean slate.
No, these are great suggestions.
Yeah, and I think that would be helpful.
To the pro. Yeah.
Well, we ask, I find it, interesting that we ask clients, when they're about to be sentenced, Mary talked a little bit about the PSR, we ask them about what are their assets, because you're asking them these questions about what do you own, and if you have this, and if you have that, because you want to know whether or not the judge will have the ability to impose a fine. But quite frankly, your name is an asset. Having a clean slate is an asset. And so, I think if clients look at that as an asset, then maybe in the future they would realize that's an asset that I want to protect. That's an asset that I want to, improve and do better in the future. And by doing that is starting with having that clean record, and knowing that this is an asset that you're going to need when you are released in order to move forward, in order to truly move forward with your life. And I think, this bill and this new law, it's going to go a long way. I think it's a tremendous step. I think we have a long way to go, but I also think it's a tremendous step because, it's not just the weight of the conviction of your past, but just to move forward psychologically, it really is going to help a lot of people to know that this burden has been lifted, and now I can truly move forward, and truly aspire to who, they believe that they should be or want to be, and hope for them to be.
No, I think, Linda, thank you for what you said about the reputation, your character as an asset. And I think that's why the voting measure was so important as to parole and probation, the leadership of Senator Ron Rice and Shavonda Sumner, because if you're going to be a full participant in democracy, you need to be able to have the right of franchise, the right of voting.
So I think it's about, you mentioned educating individuals, and I think if we start with educating them, then perhaps there will be more people who will move for expungement.
So I just wanted to touch base, and I'm sure the Attorney General, I would think, is no longer with us because, but I just wanted to give him an offer, and Senate President Sweeney. One, I'm so grateful that both of them were participants. And my dear friend, my strategic partner, Reverend Bartley, my brother. And I just also wanted to close, and, we talked about prior convictions, we talked about judgments, we talked about arrests. Alex talked about, first and second degree crimes, what's excluded, what's not included. I loved what Beth said about compelling interest. And I love what Karen said about municipal. These are ideas that, I hear about anecdotally with our participants, but as we begin to redraft, I just wanted to turn it back to Larry and Alex for some concluding thoughts. In the interest of, we'll take Alex. He's take Alex first, and then I'll just ask Larry to take us out. Alex.
Thanks, Governor. Listen, I want to just echo what has been said by so many on this call so far, which is that we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the tremendous legislative leadership of people like Senator Cunningham and Senate President Sweeney. And we really have come a long way. But as the ACLU lawyer on this call, it's my obligation to not praise us for how far we've come, but to remind us of how far we have yet to go. And we know what those steps are, and we just need to remain committed to doing it. But I also I would be remiss if I didn't echo Larry's praise for Karen at VLJ and the folks at Essex Newark Legal Services and other legal services providers who do expungements. It really is the people in the trenches doing that work that make this happen. We can have a great law on the books and have that 6% coverage that the Attorney General was talking about. That doesn't help anyone. We need to have a good law that maximizes eligibility and make sure that those who are eligible are actually utilizing those services. So with thanks to them and with gratitude for the work that's yet to come, I look forward to being in this fight with you all.
Thank you. And before Larry gets on, I just asked Rahat if she wants to make a pitch for more volunteers for intermunicipal courts to help address outstanding warrants and what we do every day. Rahat, did you want any concluding remarks in terms of our legal points of contact or volunteer lawyers for NJRC?
Sure, thank you. So yeah, we're definitely always looking for additional pro bono opportunities to assist our clients in their appearances in municipal court. And again, the purpose of those appearances is to help to remove warrants and any defects on our clients' licenses, which, as previously stated, is critical in their being able to obtain employment, obtain housing, and also public benefits. So we always welcome the opportunity and the interest of additional pro bono attorneys.
Yeah, thank you, Ron. And I appreciate you talking about employment because expungement for us is always so closely, and Beth and Karen and a number of other people talked about employment, but it is so inextricably tied to prospective employment. I mean, we're doing some good work with NJBIA and with Walmart and with some large retailers and companies. I can give a shout out to Sansone and Shopper at Wakefern and Arrow Farms and UPS, but it's expungements, particularly, I mean, and Beth talked about earlier, not so much CDS, but it's the shoplifting. It's the crimes that people believe, rightly or wrongly, are ostensibly linked to the skills or the tests to be performed that serves as a blockage. So for us, expungement is so critically important. And if I can, I just want everybody to notice that Rahat behind her is a great window. I want to thank the Senate President. I want to thank the Speaker, Craig Coughlin, for all their support of reentry. But I just also want you to know that we don't work in plush circumstances. With that, I just like to call upon Larry, and who's not only a dear friend and is, for me, is the leading sort of intellectual light of what we do in so many fronts, and is a third base coach, whether to run or slide into home. But Larry's been helping us shepherd many of these competing interests in terms of what is the priority. And expungement is something, as he said, with our dear friend, and I also want to give a shout out to Assemblywoman Yvonne Lopez, but particularly to Senator Cunningham. It's something we worked on, literally, for 5-6 years. And so with that, I'd like to give it to the elder statesman, Larry Lusberg.
So elder. That didn't end as well as it began. And you know, he didn't tell me, just so you all know, that I was going to conclude here. Like these webinars with Jim McGreevy are sort of like being called on in first year law school. It's the same feeling. Let me just say, you know, I started off at the beginning saying that, talking about how expungement is part of criminal justice reform. There's never been a time in our history when criminal justice reform has been more important than it is now. Not just because of the racial issues, which are so incredibly profound and important to all of us, but also because of what it means for who we are and how we think about other people. The thing about expungement is this expression of forgiveness. It's an understanding that people have human worth. As Alex said before, even if they've committed really bad crimes. When we advocate for expungement and when we get it done, we're doing more than helping a few people to get jobs or housing. We are directly addressing mass incarceration, but more than that, we're going right to the hearts and minds of a country that needs to be forgiving, that needs to show compassion, that has to be understand that we're all in this together. So, I know in this election season, those are big themes, and expungement may feel like a little thing, but it is a little thing that's part of the bigger picture that I think we all need to embrace in these very difficult times. And so it's been, honestly, an incredible highlight of my now long, as Jim McGreevy has made clear, career, to work with all of you on expungement and on criminal justice reform. But we do have more to do, and I'll wake up every morning looking forward to doing it with each and every one of you. So thank you, really, from the bottom of my heart.
Thanks, Larry. And I also, just before we wrap up, I want to thank Reverend Bartley, who was my partner, and the late Reverend Ron Christian, who would keep in his sanctuary his robe from Southern State and his clerical robe right next to each other. And God rest his soul, Ron would always remind us, for me and for all of us, for many of us, we believe in a God of second chances, but it's as Larry said, to see the potential for each person. With that, I'd like to thank the governor. I'd like to thank Senate President Steve. I'd like to thank Craig Coughlin, Larry, and especially Senator Cunningham, or Attorney General Goubert, everybody who participated. I'd also like to give a shout out to Justin Hughes for all of his work, and now he's working for the Biden campaign. I wanted to thank Justin. And I want to thank everybody, but most importantly, for the courage and strength of the people we are privileged to serve every day, for their belief in us and our belief in them, to move forward, to believe in that second chance. And it says in Scripture to forgive 70 times 7. We're a long way for that, but I think the expungement bill, as all of you have shared, is a step in the right direction. So again, thank you for your friendship, your commitment, and for the faith and confidence in the people we're privileged to serve. So signing out at 1:59, a minute early, on time. Thank you so much, everyone. Godspeed.
Thanks, Jim. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Have a good day.
Have a good day.